Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 18, The Secrets of the Witches from A History of Secret Societies by Arkon Daraul. Chapter 17, The Secrets of the Witches. When you try to approach the question of black magic, it becomes apparent that 20th century man and woman is still very much in the psychological position of any savage in almost any jungle. He is either afraid of it or knows nothing at all about what it might be. Prominent in his thinking is likely to be the unformed idea that it is evil not to be meddled with, connected with obscene rites. But what is it? Who are its practitioners? Does it work? Now read your newspapers. Ever since the popular press replaced the harassing pamphlets that used to be printed and circulated at the slightest excuse, black magic exposes have been frequent. The only difficulty is that they tell next to nothing about black magic. Insanity, obscenity, undefined dangers are hinted at. Warnings are given, backed by the pronouncements of churchmen, that this thing is dangerous. The police are very often quoted as investigating or interested in what is very often called a revival of black magic, which is always characterized as sweeping the country, carried out in secret in high places for nasty but undefined purposes. This may all be very true and very laudable, but it is surprising that nobody seems to have approached the subject from any other point of view, particularly that of merely collecting information about the practices and the people who carry them out. Can an evil be stamped out by people who do not know what it is, who do not know upon what it is based? Now as to definitions. Those who believe in the existence of a devil or a number of demons have asserted that the black magician is one who gains temporary power over certain fields of life through an arrangement made with one of these supernatural beings. In Western magic, the price is often believed to be the surrender of the individual's soul after a fixed term of years to prevent it being able to reach heaven. Among peoples who do not believe that the devil has such overwhelming power as to gain possession of a human soul, his aid is sought to further the cause of evil itself, helping him, as it were, to carry on his work in this world. There is a third group of believers in black magic. To them, the art consists in cultivating what is termed by them destructive power, which is then projected upon the victim, probably to cause his death or other disaster. People of this persuasion may not believe in the existence of a devil, may rather feel that the power which they use is something of neutral tinge, which can be accumulated and used for good or evil purposes. They generally hold that the evil, destructive use of this power is easier than the constructive use, because emotions of hatred are more easily aroused and projected than those of construction. Spells and magical processes designed to curse others when they do not involve an invocation and pact with an evil spirit come within the last category. A considerable confusion has arisen throughout the ages by the superimposing of one set of ideas upon another and the introduction and modification of magical beliefs one with the other. Thus we find in Europe spellbooks, grimoires, which give long and elaborate processes for conjuring and compelling demons, which undoubtedly derive from Babylonian and Jewish demonology. Christianized, some of these involve a sacrifice to, or pact made with, the spirit. Other processes clearly show that they are based upon the idea that the magician can compel the demon, an inferior being, to work for him and do his bidding by the use of secret and magical words of power. This is derived from the hekau, words of power, used by the priests of ancient Egypt, who believed themselves to be masters rather than slaves of evil spirits. Islamic demonology, which came into Europe via medieval Spain, has a similar attitude. Even evil jinns, genies, were inferior creatures whom the properly trained magician could control. If black magic is to be considered anything that is concerned with the use of supernatural force for an apparently evil purpose, then there is a third form. This includes such afflictions as the evil eye, which is involuntary. According to primitive and modern belief throughout the world, a person may have the evil eye and may not know it. Among the Arabs, it is believed that people who are envious of others can inflict evil upon them by the mere force of that envy, by thinking about the object of dislike powerfully enough, but not necessarily with the intention of any evil actually resulting. Actual worship of the devil is another question. According to the records of the Inquisition and the many witch trials of Europe, the deity of the witches was a devil, that is, a power of evil, represented by a human being who occupied a place of importance in the rituals of the cult. To anyone without a special bias in favor of preconceived theory, it seems more than likely that this was the case. Modern apologists for witchcraft may say that the witches were in fact the wise people of pre-Christian times, that their homed god was a fertility figure, and so on. But they seem to have selected from among the mass of material, folklore and legal certain aspects of a religion and rejected the others. In order to do this plausibly, it has been necessary to claim a connected chain of tradition which they themselves alone possess. Otherwise, of course, they could be accused of proof by selected instances. At the same time, they have established no proof of the truth of their fertility cult, and still less that it was not primarily an evil or a good one. Writers like Montague Summers and Margaret Murray have done no service to knowledge by stretching their material almost beyond logical credence. Summers, the Catholic, felt that the devil was almost everywhere. Miss Murray, the Egyptologist, asks one to believe in divine kings and prehistoric religion as if there were sufficient evidence to establish them beyond cavil. Many of the confessions attributed to witches by their Christian persecutors may well have been obtained by force, cajolery, and prompting. But the picture that remains when the material is carefully studied seems to show that there was, in fact, a devil worship cult, which practiced black magic in full cry in Europe. Had the Inquisitors wanted to concoct the whole story from start to finish, they could have made a much better job of it. Further, they were well aware of the literature of black magic of the grimoire type. Even popes were known to have practiced the ritual form of magic which this kind of book contains. It would have been far more likely that, had the witch mania been deceit on the part of the Church, the latter would have modelled the confessions which they are supposed to have put into the mouths of the witches upon the form of black magic which they knew, especially from the demonology of the Old and New Testaments. What is the form of black magic attributed to the witches? Worship and propitiation of an evil being, for one thing, represented by a human figure. Further, the carrying out of spells which differ very little, even in detail, from those which belong to the black art as practiced by primitive peoples the world over. Finally, the cultivation of supernormal powers, flying, prophecy, and the like, which seem to have been induced by drugs. It is possible to reconstruct many of the witch practices from contemporary literature. Careful examination of the Inquisition records of various countries, plus the confessions of a number of the people accused of being secret devotees of a diabolical cult or conspiracy against the Church, produces much evidence in favor of the belief that the sect was no delusion. This is not to say that it really was derived from the fertility religion, though this is what Miss Murray seems to think. Neither by a long chalk does it seem to accord with the theory of the Church that it was a parody of Christianity invented by the devil. There is no evidence of supernatural intervention. Secret societies, whether political or religious, tend to remain secret, and in many cases only the piecing together of evidence can bring the story to the surface. In seeking to reconstruct the witch cult in Europe, we have to look for several things. Do the early references to the rites show, for instance, that there is a lingering of another religion below the later Christian one? Is there any evidence of absorption of another propagandist cult from outside? Are there ceremonies of initiation, passwords, strange names, a priesthood, evidences of a purpose behind such an association? In the case of the underground organization, at first dimly described through the hysteria of witch persecutions, every one of these indications and more can be found. Naturally, there is no cult which can be said to be pure, to contain the essential elements of its original days. And this is clearly true of what the sorcerers and witches practiced. But there seems ample material to show that their movement was very much standardized and very much in operation until at least comparatively recent days. The literature on witchcraft is immense, and its study is complicated by the fact that more than one school of thought has tried to produce a meaning by selecting instances and weaving therefrom a possible explanation, varying from a belief in complete invention and delusion to a theory of a meek and mild, harmless collection of gay, carefree hailers of the ancient astronomical and seasonal festivals, united in fellowship and dispensing moral and physical salves to the afflicted peasantry. Those who claim that they actively practice witchcraft today form yet another class, but they can answer only for the particular rites which are their own. Whatever one may think of the ignorance and the confusion of the medieval church in its zeal to fight anything that challenged Christianity, it is interesting to note that among the earliest Western ecclesiastical records mentioning what later became known as witchcraft, there is more than one mention of people who worship Diana and other gods. People who think that they are carried magically from one place to another, night riding with Diana. The earliest mentions of the witches' sabbats, which were also known as synagogues, come in the 11th century and seem to show the assimilation of the Diana cult with another, one which involves the worship of a black man. Then we have mention of brewing potions, rubbing on ointments, meetings and spells at crossroads, renouncing Christianity and the use of the pierced wax image in a death spell. By the 15th century, there was a remarkable similarity between witch meetings reported or confessed to in many countries, some without much contact with one another. Reference will be made later to the Sabbat rituals reported from Sweden, Spain, Scotland and France. From the 7th to the 15th centuries, the Moors were ruling Spain and North Africa. Cultural penetration from their universities into Western Europe was enormous, while their translations of Greek and other philosophical books posed a challenge which the theologians of the West were hard put to meet. During this very same period, a strange cult had arisen in Morocco, crossed the straits into Andalusia, and was actively, if secretly, followed in centers of Arab civilization with cosmopolitan populations. The latter consisted of Arabized Jews, Christian scholars and wandering ascetics who traveled from one country to another in search of knowledge. The cult was called by the Arab authorities, who tried to put it down, the double-homed, and seemed to be connected with moon worship. It certainly was associated with magic, and its similarities to what were later reported as the witch practices are very close. The devotees of this cult met on Thursday nights, were initiated by having a wound inflicted somewhere on the body which left a small scar, and believed that they could raise magical power by dancing in or around a circle. Some of them claimed that they at times carried out religious services which involved the saying of the Muslim prayers backwards and invoking El Aswad, the black man, to help them. They served their priests, whom they saw only rarely, says the historian Ibn Jafar, after taking an oath of fealty of body and soul. They were drawn from all sections of the community, were of both sexes, and used ritual knives in the scarring ceremony. These knives were known as al-dame, or blood letters. Here is a typical initiation ceremony of the homed ones. We gathered by night where two paths met and crossed, and he who had been so instructed bore with him a cock, which was to be sacrificed as the emblem of the new day. Each carried a staff with the two horns in brass upon the head, which is symbolical of the goat which is ridden, the sign of power and irresistibility. This is the meeting, which is called the Zabat, the forceful or powerful one, and the circle of companions are the kafan, Arabic for winding sheet. We were thus termed because each man wears over his naked flesh during the ritual only the white plain sheet in which he will be buried. I was to be given the sanctity that night and to join the band of the elect who would spread joy throughout the world, those of us who are companions of the Rabbana, our Lord, exemplified by the blacksmith. In Morocco to this day, blacksmiths are considered to be great sorcerers, and in the Middle East in general, as well as in the Arabian Nights, it is the Moor who is always a magician. The initiate continues, small drums beat as we 12 came into the circle which had been drawn in the dust. Two dervishes in their white kaffans taught us the chant of Iwai, which we repeated to the drums. Then the end of the kaffan over our shoulders was put over our heads, and we whirled in dance until there was a loud shout. At this our eyes were uncovered, and we saw that the leader had appeared. Next, the devotees were required to swear allegiance to this newcomer, Rabbana, and the cock was sacrificed with the small knife by cutting the throat. Each initiate was nicked with the knife on the arm. The dance started afresh anti-clockwise, or as witch tales have it, widdershins, ending in a form of ecstasy such as is often described following such rituals. The account mentioned is not complete by any means, for the writer, who had had a somewhat checkered career as a Jew from Basra, a magian and sorcerer, Dulkameni, eventually became a Muslim and seems quite reluctant to reveal all the mysteries of his shameful past. From another source, however, we find that among the blue-eyed Berbers of the Moroccan Atlas Mountains, a similar type of ceremony is still extant, Abdulmalik Haruni, in his Mu'jizat Ifriqiya, Wonders of Africa, writing 1,000 years later in Constantinople, speaks of the Berber sect of the Homed One, who light fires and dance around them. Each member carries a staff called the goat, which he throws away during the ecstasy of the ritual dance. They drink wine and are sworn to the absolute allegiance of a chief who enrolls them at a ceremony in which they formally renounce not only any former religion, but their parents and relatives, and then he teaches them how to achieve a state of psychic drunkenness in which they have mystical and magical powers. These people also believe that they have a hidden supreme leader called Dulkanen, the two-horned lord, whose name also means, by a play upon words, Lord of the Two Centuries. This coincidence of meaning is considered to be deliberate because Rabbana has a useful life of 200 years. The first portion is until he dies. After that, for the remainder of the 2 centuries, he remains attached to the earth in some sort of spirit form, able to direct the work and play of others, and attaining wisdom in this fresh dimension, until he is ready to descend to the world of mankind as one of the men of perfection, in a sort of reincarnation. He chooses what form of incarnation he prefers and retains a full and complete memory of his former life on earth. There are a large number of correspondences between this strange cult and that attributed to the witches in the Middle Ages. It seems quite possible that medieval European witchcraft was a mixture of two-hornism and various remnants of folk belief from pre-Christian times. In 1324, the trial of Lady Keitler in Ireland brought up the allegations that she was a witch, that she sacrificed a red cock to one Robin, who was called an Ethiopian, and that she carried out a ritual at a crossroads. All these factors seem curiously close to those which belonged to the Berber sect. The use of the name Robin and Robinet and other variations is more than once found in European witchcraft cases. The appearance of the black man is not uncommon. The horns, which may account for the identification with the devil, are much in evidence. Was there a connection between the Moors and Western Europe as early as this? Most decidedly so, and much earlier for that matter. Anglo-Saxon coins, imitating Arab dinars of AD 774, even to the "there is only Allah and Muhammad is his messenger," were struck by King Offa. The originals were minted by the Caliph who ruled Spain. In 1450, a tract entitled Errores Gazariorum gives a sketch of what were reputed to be the rites of the Sabbat of the Witches in France. After being seduced into joining the cult, the member was made to promise that when summoned, he would immediately leave for the meeting. He was given ointment and a staff. He or she is presented to the devil at the synagogue, a place rather than a building, according to the context in which this word is usually used in witch recitals of the period. The devil appears in the form of an imperfect man or animal, and not infrequently as a black cat. The initiate is asked whether he will adhere to the society and obey it in all things. He swears this allegiance and vows that he will obey the master. He will find as many members as possible. He will disclose no secrets unto death, will kill as many children under 3 years of age as he can, and bring the bodies to the synagogue, will come whenever summoned, will prevent what marriages he can by magic, will avenge all harm done to the sect and its members. Then the newcomer must worship the devil and kiss him under the tail, and promises a part of his body to him after his death. He's given a box of ointment and a staff, and instructions how to use them. A feast now takes place, in which children are cooked and eaten. The lights are put out and all dance, after which there is indiscriminate intercourse between the members. After some time, the lights are again kindled, and further eating, this time with drinking, takes place. Sacrilegious anti-Christian acts form the next part of the proceedings, and if anyone breaks the rules or does anything that is not to the taste of the master, he or she is beaten. This document is a summary of contemporary witch beliefs. Written by an inquisitor, it makes use of material obtained from many confessions. If we remove the anti-Christian part of the rite and also discount the cannibalism, it is still possible to say that this might well be a primitive ritual, celebrated by a community of ecstatics who follow a method of producing frenzy and ultimate release, what modern psychologists call catharsis. Now we may look at a Sabbat report, which seems to be either a composite one or to originate in Spain, for Spanish words are used in it. Satan, in the shape of a huge he-goat, sits on a throne at the place of the ritual. He has a face in front and another on his haunches. All who are present kiss him on both faces. This Satan appoints a master of ceremonies, and with him he examines all the witches and wizards who attend for the secret mark which identifies them as his own. Singing and dancing in the most furious manner follows this procedure, and then it is the turn of the new members to be initiated. The newcomers deny their salvation, kiss the devil, spit on the Bible, and swear obedience in all things. Now the dance is restarted, while the new initiates are welcomed with the words, Alegremos, alegremos, que gente nueva tenemos, the meaning of which is, roughly, we are happy to have new members. This dance seems to continue for an hour, after which all sit down and recount their evil doings since the last meeting. Those who have not sinned enough are beaten by the devil. There may now be a dance of toads. The devil stamps his foot and they disappear. At the banquet which comes next, disgusting things are served up and, for some reason, greedily devoured. When the cock crows, the sabbat breaks up. From Scotland, in the celebrated case of Dr. Fian, we find a witch meeting which could well have been held by a group such as subscribed to the above activities, if such indeed existed. Dr. Fian was a teacher and was put on trial towards the end of 1590, accused of trying by witchcraft to do away with King James I of England, the monarch who, not unnaturally, developed such an implacable hatred for witches and their works. Fian confessed, and although elements in the story show that some of the allegations are purely propagandist ones, there seems to be a strong association with an underground cult which believed in the use of magical power. The devil was said to want to kill King James because he was his worst enemy on earth. Disregarding this kind of material and stripping the alleged witch meeting in a church down to its bare bones, a framework of a conspiracy cum cult does become visible. Summarized, the account tells of how the witches met and performed a ritual circumambulation around a church in an anti-clockwise direction. Then the wizard blew into the lock of the door, and it opened. He blew upon a candle, which lit itself. Now the devil was seen to be occupying the pulpit, dressed in a black gown and hat, and was saluted with the cry, "All hail, Master!" The ritual garments and get-up of this cult functionary follow the hint in other accounts that an animal disguise was adopted. His body was hard like iron, his face terrible, his nose was like a beak. He had great burning eyes, the hands and legs were hairy, there were long claws on hands and feet, his voice was very gruff. The devil called over the names of the congregation, asking whether they had been good servants and what success had attended their magical operations against the king. He boxed the ears of a crazy old warlock who inadvertently made the automatic answer that, fortunately, the king was well. Now came the sermon in which the witches were exhorted to be dutiful servants and to do all the evil they could. There was then a heated exchange between the fiend and some of his servants, because he had forgotten to bring a wax image which he had undertaken to prepare for them to curse. The ritual continued with the eating of a corpse, then much wine which they liked, and they became jolly. Finally the dance, with the devil leading off, which lasted until cockcrow. The very human elements in this story, the devil's forgetfulness, his need of accumulated concentration upon the wax image, boxing the ears of the warlock, the wine and the dance, point to a ritual carried out by a local group of cultists rather than something of transcendental meaning prompted by the theological devil of the churchman. Again and again one is struck in such tales by the fact that if these were, as has been alleged, entirely concocted stories by the church, they would have been couched in the language and the spirit of traditional Christian demonology. Even the Widdowson's movement of the circuit of the place where the ritual was held can be better understood than by the contention that it was evil, because it reversed the more normal way of going around a sanctified place in a reverse direction. The most ancient ritual practices with a connected history known to us include, in the Mecca pilgrimage, counterclockwise religious circuits before the devotee passes between the two pillars of the Mecca running place. Hewitt, in his primitive traditional history, has made a study of this matter. In ancient astronomical lore, it was believed that the retrograde left-hand circuits of the Great Bear around the pole accurately represented the circular tracks of the sun and moon through the stars. The belief in the sunwise, clockwise motion of the sun, he says, quoting ancient practice, only began at a comparatively late period. Thus, it may well be that the anti-clockwise ritual circuit is the older survival, not just an evil reversal of custom. Now to Sweden and the blocular sabbats. Again, we can take the bare bones of what the self-confessed witches stated they performed in the way of ritual. They went, it was stated in August 1669, to a gravel pit near a crossroads, placed a vest over their heads and danced round and round. Then they proceeded right up to the crossroads and called 3 times to the devil, "Antecessor, come and carry us to Blockula." A little old man now appears, in red and blue stockings with very long garters. His high-crowned hat is folded around with bands of many-coloured linen. A long red beard hangs to his middle. This apparition, who seems to be the leader of the cult, asks whether the devotees will serve him, body and soul. They agree and make ready for the journey. In order to get there, he stipulates that they have to find scrapings of altars and filings from church bells. He gives them a horn with salve in it, with which they anoint themselves. He brings beasts for them to ride upon, a saddle, hammer and nail. Now he speaks some words, and away they fly over churches, walls, rocks. They arrive at green meadows. On Blockula Mountain there is a great house with tables to sit down at and delicate beds in which to sleep. The witches bind themselves to the service of the master, body and soul. There is a feast. The devil takes the chair, plays the harp or fiddle as they eat. Now they dance in a ring, sometimes naked, sometimes not, cursing and swearing all the time. The flying and the ointment belong together in this as in other tales of this kind. It has already often been pointed out that the so-called witch ointment was one which contained such things as hyoscine, which gave the impression of flying. This brings us to the interesting Persian sect called the Mascara, revelers, who danced madly to induce ecstasy, used henbane to produce visions, and gave the world the word masquerade, because they dressed in animal masks, blacked their faces, and pretended to be supernatural creatures. In English and other Western languages, their name is still preserved, for this face-blacking compound is known as mascara and used by women to apply shadows to the eyes. In AD 1518, Johannes de Tabir states that the Mascari is a sect and is an alternative name for witches. If the witches, the horned ones, and the revelers are not one and the same society, at least it may be said that all 3 of these cults shared certain beliefs and practices and may be derived from a common origin. The ritual blacking of the face, the black man was easily equated by the church with the devil. Among the Mascara, however, the meaning of this disguise was that death is to be followed by reawakening. And the awakening came through the ecstasy which was produced by dancing and drugs. Wine is mentioned as used by all 3 sects, so is dancing and circumambulation. Sublimes, princes de royal secret, ciphers used by secret societies. There were 2 main objectives in the rituals of these secret cults. The first was the liberation of the individual from the bonds of ordinary morality and especially of self-restraint. The second was the belief that acting together, the congregation could achieve, by the use of their united wills, the destruction of enemies or the progress of their plans. The important place taken by the priests or devils and the confused nature of the reports of the drug devotees show that in all probability it was the master magician or devil who alone held the secret knowledge of how their united emotion was to be discharged as part of a magical rite. They had to obey him, and he was the person who produced the ritual ecstasy which was necessary for him to project their mutual psychic power. The actual presence of demons and so on has been questioned by religious commentators, and some of the most interesting indications showing that the cult was really a religious one are found in the period before it had been associated with devil worship by the church. Looking through these earlier records, one is struck by the fact that the writers seem to be recording remnants of a subterranean ritual. In January of 1091, Father Gualchelm of St. Albin's Church at Angers reports a huge collection of people on horseback and on foot going past him. "This," he said, "is the Harlequin, of whom I've heard, but in which I did not believe." 500 years later, Enjacquier reports that witnesses had actually seen assemblies of witches. The witches had agreed that they had been so observed, but there were no demons with them. This was because demons render themselves invisible to others. It is unlikely that the ceremonies of the Sabbat, Arabic Zabat, were illusions, as Johannes Schneider claimed. but he did show that someone of his acquaintance could rub herself with an ointment and collapse in a coma through the effects of the drug penetrating the skin, afterwards believing that she had actually attended a sabbat during that period. Jerome Cardan, who evidently could not bring himself to believe the party line that devils materialized and led people astray, records in some puzzlement that witches do identify their leaders and ritual locations so unanimously that these facts must be true. There were probably quite large numbers of followers of the cult in one or other of its forms. The famous poet Martin Elsie Franck alleged in the middle of the 15th century that at various places as many as 3,000 to 10,000 people attended sabbats. Some versions of the cult may have had political ambitions. In Switzerland, the devil told the 700 members of his cult at a meeting in 1428 that eventually they would have their own laws and would overthrow Christianity. This strange melange seems to be the cult of witchcraft, which was most popular with the country people of medieval Europe, and a good many of their betters as well. The modern versions as practiced by those who believe that they have inherited the lore of the witches are unlikely to be strongly connected with the central theme of the real witchcraft. Of the form in which witchcraft was practiced in the Middle Ages, there is little trace today. Perhaps it has died out, ritualistically speaking. There are still, however, coteries of devotees and lone practitioners who rely upon some of the legends of the witches and sorcerers. In the 18th century and after, various attempts were made to revive witch practices. These can be identified quite easily as bogus because ignorance of the important Oriental elements in the cult causes errors of interpretation and ritual which point to fabrication of the materials. The Satanists of modern France are an entirely different question, forming real and bogus secret societies based upon the Catholic concept of the devil. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.